So you'll see him use several tools throughout the process. And this is our glass. This is his first gather of clear glass. So that clear glass comes out of the furnace at 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 1150 Celsius. At that temperature, it glows bright orange. So that's that orange glow you see, but in fact, it's clear glass. So a puff of air into that hollow blowpipe, and there is our bubble, and into one of our optic molds at the foot of the stage here. And when he brings that out, you'll see there's a lot of surface texture on there now in the form of dimples. Now that particular mold, we call it a pineapple mold or a pin mold or a Bellington mold. But this really is not enough glass to make a bowl. We could probably make a small ornament or a small drinking glass out of this amount, but we really want to step it up a notch and get more material to work with. So in order to do that, he's going to let this gather cool down to about 1,000 degrees. And at that temperature, the glass becomes rigid and we can't really shape it any longer. Each one of those dimples created by that pineapple mold traps an air bubble. So now we have a really nice organized pattern of air bubbles within inside that gather of glass. Now, using a wooden tool, we call this a block, he's shaping that fresh new gather. Now, as we're tooling and working the glass, it cools down pretty quickly, so we have to keep referring back to this furnace. Now, this furnace is our reheating furnace, strictly for reheating whatever we're working on. It contains no glass, and you'll be revisiting that furnace quite often throughout the process. Why did it hold up? That's the reason why we let it cool down to where it's stiffened. If we went back in with that first bubble too hot, it would certainly collapse in on itself. So we want to avoid that. So we wait till it's what we call ice cold. 1,000 degrees is ice cold for us. So at that temperature, it's not going to collapse in on itself. That's a good question though. So using a steel tool, we call these jacks, and he's using the blades of that tool to make a narrow constriction right next to the end of the blowpipe. And we call that constriction a jack line. And it plays a pretty big part in everything we do, because at some point we want to remove this from that blowpipe, and it's at that jack line that we'll do a controlled break and transfer the piece. Silica sand, soda ash, and limestone. We could mix that up, call it batch, throw that right in the furnace. There's some downsides to using that though. One of them being silica sand is a very fine particulate, and we don't want that floating in the air. It's very bad to breathe. Another thing is we would have to turn our furnace quite a bit more, consuming more energy, because it takes a higher temperature to melt the raw materials. So we choose to melt glass that's already been melted once. So we purchase it, and it comes in this form, these little chunks. This is called cullet. We get 50-pound bags of these. This is produced in Mexico, and it's one of the most prominent metals from within the earth. So it's made in Mexico, but ultimately we purchase it through a supplier in Southern California.
Another question. Could you use recycled glass or?
Could we use recycled glass? Yes, we do. So we opt to throw all that scrap glass away. Now, however, it does get used, just not by us. So we work with local contractors, and they'll come and pick up our discarded glass, and they use it in construction materials. So we're making a stem here. Good job. Landing pad, sure. So you're gonna see him use another wooden tool. I'm gonna get a gather of glass, and he's gonna spool that second gather on, right on that little flat surface that he just made. Again, spooling that right on. Now this is what happens when we stop turning the pipe. Cool it down a bit. Once it's shaped and ready to go, I'll present this to Liam, and he will attach this to the bottom of that foot that he just made. Once it's attached, it'll allow him to introduce some thermal shock to that narrow jack line that I talked about earlier. Now that thermal shock can either be a couple drops of water, or maybe just touching it with a room temperature steel tool. It's going to create a weak spot in the glass. The glass always breaks at the weakest point. Yep. Little cold steel and a tap. And I say we celebrate with a rousing round of applause so we can add color. There certainly are other approaches to applying color, but that's the fastest and easiest. And that's how most of these pieces were colored. We do a lot of our demonstrations in clear glass because it makes it easier for you folks to actually see the process. It's cut right through that glass, thinning it out. Where it's connected to the blowpipe is typically the thickest section. And the easiest and fastest way to get rid of all that extra thickness is just to shear it away with a specialized set of shears. Now, I bet you guys didn't realize you could cut through glass. Well, you can if it's hot enough. Now, beginning glass blowers really struggle with that particular cut. The rookie tendency is to not get the glass hot enough. Great. All right, this is a really nice shape, just like that. But Liam wants to take it one step further. He's going to use the heat of that furnace, a little bit of physics in the form of centrifugal force, and by holding it up, letting gravity do the work. By holding it up and slowing the turning down, that's what gives us that really beautiful fabric-like effect. Now to remove this piece, because now it's completed, it's just a couple drops of water where that putty connection is, and a light tap to the iron, and it should come right off. There you have it, folks.